I'm Dr. Silas Mordaunt, Associate Professor of Literature. Alexandre Dumas, The Count of Monte Cristo, has been read in the wrong direction for 180 years. Today I'm going to read it correctly. This methodology is called the retrograde audit. The retrograde audit begins at the novel's end and proceeds to its beginning, treating the text's chronological order as an imposition rather than an instruction. I will not need to elaborate further on this methodology because we will proceed directly to the results. The results are these. The Count of Monte Cristo is a novel about restoration, about a man who begins in corruption and moves across 3,000 pages back toward innocence, back towards Marseille, but toward the sailor he was before the world intervened. This is what the novel has always been about, and what the retrograde audit makes visible. So we begin now. The man currently operating under the name the Count of Monte Cristo is on a ship. He has just given away his island. He has distributed the majority of his treasure among several people whose significance the retrograde audit will establish as we proceed backwards through their stories. He is sailing away from everything, and he has Haiti beside him, and the sea is open, and in the retrograde audit, this is not an ending. This is a man at the start of a very long journey home, standing on a deck with considerably less than he will eventually be carrying, pointing in the right direction for the first time. The island of Monte Cristo recedes behind him. He's found it, used it. Now he's returned it to Maximilian in Haiti, and this act of return is the retrograde audit's first piece of evidence, because it establishes the novel's central action immediately, a man divesting. A man setting things down in reverse order of acquisition, lightening by degrees, moving backward through everything he accumulated toward the condition of a person who has nothing but a name and a ship and the ocean. The divestment has begun on the novel's last page and will continue as the retrograde audit proceeds all the way back to Marseille. This is the journey. This is what Dumas wrote. We are following it now in the direction it was designed to be followed. Haiti is the one thing the Count does not return. Everything else goes back. The island, the treasure, the network. The name will go back eventually, but Haiti comes with him into the retrograde reading, which tells us something precise about what the audit considers essential versus accumulated. She is no apparatus. She's not an instrument of the Count, or his ward, or the eastern thread of a revenge tapestry. She is the person beside him at the starting point of his journey home. And her presence here at the beginning of the backwards reading is the retrograde audit's first proper indication that whatever Edmond Dantes was before he became the court, he was not entirely alone. And he will not be entirely alone when he gets back. Working backwards from the ship, we arrive at the revenge plots in their completed states, and this is where the retrograde audit's methodology begins to demonstrate what it is for. 3 men are in 3 different kinds of ruin, and the retrograde audit receives each ruin not as a conclusion, but as a premise. The starting condition of a backwards journey that will take each man through his consequences toward his crime and through his crime toward the moment before it. Fernand de Morcerf, the Count de Morcerf, is standing in the wreckage of his house with a gun. His son Albert has renounced him publicly. His wife Mercedes has left. His manufactured title, his manufactured history, the entire constructed edifice of the life he built on another man's ruin has been dismantled before the Chamber of Peers by the testimony of Haiti, who identified him as the man who sold her father and her into slavery. He is the last thing standing in a house that has been emptied of everything that made it worth standing in. And a gun. Well, the gun resolves the situation in the only direction available to a man of his particular vanity and his particular despair. The retrograde audit begins here. Fernand with the gun, and that's the starting point. And from the starting point, the retrograde audit moves backwards, and what it moves through is the precise sequence of losses in reverse, the title returning, the house refilling, Albert's contempt softening back into the filial obedience of a son who does not yet know what his father is, Mercedes returning to the position of a woman who has not yet been given the evidence that would make departure the only dignified option. The retrograde audit follows the sequence backwards with attention because what it is tracing is more than rehabilitation. It's not rehabilitation at all. It's the architecture of his crime. How much had to be built on top of it? How many years of construction? How elaborate the edifice required to house a man who had done what Ferdinand did on a dock in Marseille in an evening when his friend was happy and he was not. The retrograde audit is not interested in Fernand's suffering. It's interested in his structure, and the structure, reading now backwards from the gun, through the ruin, through the title, through the years of manufactured respectability, leads to a young man on a dock writing a letter. And the letter is where we are going, and the gun is where we started. And the distance between them is the novel's account of what a letter can cost when it is written by the wrong person for the wrong reasons at the right moment to destroy someone completely. Danglars is in the Roman dungeon. Luigi Vampa's men have been feeding him at the Count's instruction, converting what remains of his fortune into meals at a rate designed to exhaust it completely before his release. He has been, over the course of his captivity, reduced from one of the wealthiest bankers in Paris to a man paying 100,000 francs for a chicken. And the reduction is nearly complete. The retrograde audit finds him here at his most reduced, and notes that from this point, moving backwards, he will only accumulate. The accumulation the retrograde audit traces backwards through down classes, the accumulation of a specific kind of man, the kind who mistakes the instruments of wealth for wealth itself, who confuses the ledger for the life, who looks at another person's happiness and performs an immediate instinctive calculation of its convertible value. Moving backwards through Danglars is moving backwards through the expansion of this instinct into a career, a fortune, a social position, a marriage contracted for advantage, but a marriage, a series of financial maneuvers of increasing sophistication and decreasing scruple, all the way back to the Marseille dock and the letter, in the moment when the instinct formed its first and most consequential calculation and decided that Edmond Dantès' happiness was an obstacle that could be profitably removed. Is this the first calculation or the last? Is the dungeon the end of the calculation, or is the letter the beginning? Or is it both? The retrograde audit moves between them and finds in the distance the precise record of what a small and acquisitive nature can build when it is given enough time and enough of other people's misfortune to build with. Villefort is in a garden. He has lost his mind. The events that produced this condition have arrived in rapid succession. The exposure of his first wife's poisoning campaign, the death of his son Edward, the public collapse of everything he spent his career constructing, the revelation that the man he sent to prison 24 years ago did not die there, and has spent the intervening decades preparing a reckoning of surgical precision. He's in the garden, raving, and the retrograde audit finds him there. And it begins with him there. Moving backwards through Villefort is the most structurally complex movement the retrograde order performs, because Villefort's crime is the oldest of the three and the most buried and the most consequential in its ramifications. The madness recedes first, the composure returns, the prosecutor reappears, the man of rectitude and judicial authority, and the particular cold ambition that wears the costume of principle so convincingly that it is convincing even to its wearer. The career reassembles itself backwards through its stages, the promotions, the cases, the reputation, the marriage into the aristocrats, the careful navigation of the restoration, and the retrograde audit follows each stage back toward its foundation, which is not the dog and a letter, but a garden and a box and a child who was buried alive, or believed to be, by a father for whom the child's inconvenient existence represented a threat to a career that had not yet fully begun. The retrograde audit moves toward that garden, is moving toward it from a different garden, the garden where Villefort stands mad and alone at the end of the novel. And the two gardens bracket the entire life, and what lies between them is the retrograde audit's territory, and that territory is the record of what a man becomes when the first thing he chooses to do in his career is prioritize himself over his child, and every subsequent choice is made by the man that first choice produced, or is that the last choice? That is the magic of the retrograde audit. Villefort in that garden at the novel's end is in full develop is the full development of the man who stood in that garden at the novel's beginning, and the retrograde audit moves between them backwards, watching the development reverse, watching the constructed man disassemble toward the original crime, which is where we are going and which is what the retrograde audit is for. So, three men, three starting points, or ending points, but starting points, three backwards journeys toward three crimes that share a single victim. The retrograde audit has its premises. That we can proceed. The retrograde order arrives in Paris, and Paris in reverse is a city gradually losing a visitor it never knew how to place anyway. The Count of Monte Cristo entered the society at a specific moment with a specific purpose, and the retrograde order, moving backwards through his campaign, watches both the moment and the purpose dissolve as the campaign unhappens around him. He came with a house on the Champs-Élysées, and a house and a limited budget, and a budget that could stretch forever, and a patient, systematic social engineering underway. The social engineering of a man who's been planning this for years, and he came with his friends and those he cared for, and the entire Eastern apparatus of his constructed identity, and he inserted himself into the city's social fabric with the precision of a practiced surgeon. The retrograde audit moves backwards through the insertions and finds in reverse a man withdrawing. The dinner parties unhappen, the introductions unhappen, and all of these carefully staged encounters with Morcerf and Danglars and Villefort, each one positioned to begin the machinery of their eventual ruin, unhappen in reverse order of their occurrence. And what the retrograde audit finds underneath them as the social campaign peels away, layer by layer, moving backwards, is a man with no social presence in Paris at all. A man who has not yet arrived. A man who is, from Paris's perspective, nobody. The retrograde audit finds this progressive anonymity significant. The Count entered Paris as the most conspicuous person in any room he entered. The wealth, the pallor, the Eastern servants, the studied theatricality of every appearance, the name that nobody could quite place, and the retrograde audit watches all of this recede as it moves backwards. the conspicuousness diminishing, the room's emptying of his presence, the name becoming unknown again. By the time the retrograde order has moved back far enough through the Paris sections, the Count is not there. And the city has no record of him. He has not yet arrived, which in the retrograde meaning means he's about to leave, which means Paris is the penultimate stage of the journey home, rather than the theatre of the revenge. And the theatre, stripped of its production, is just a city, and the city does not know him. And the retrograde audit finds this as a structural observation close to perfect. Moral and Villefort require attention here because their story running backwards through the parasections is the retrograde audit's perfect account of what the Count himself is actually doing when the divestment is understood correctly in reverse. Valentine does not survive her apparent death and recover under the Count's protection and emerge to marry Maximilian. She moves backwards through the recovery toward the apparent death, toward the poisonings, toward the household, and Maximilian moves backwards through his grief toward his ignorance of the cause of it. And the Count moves backwards through his role in the resolution toward his decision to intervene. And the retrograde audit finds at this point, where the Count decides to save Valentine, the clearest evidence of what kind of man is making the backwards journey through this novel. He saves her, moving backwards through the plot. This is among the first things we find him doing after the revenge plots have been established as the audit's premise, and the retrograde audit treats it as the first indication that the man whose starting point was a ship and an island and a divested fortune, this man is not solely the instrument of ruin that the Paris social campaign might suggest. He saves Valentine because Maximilian is the son of Moral, and Moral saved Dantes' father, and the debt runs in the direction of preservation rather than destruction. And the retrograde audit notes this debt and follows it backwards, because the debt to Moral is one of the threads that leads eventually all the way back to Marseille. And the retrograde audit is going to Marseille. And every thread that leads there is a thread worth following. So the retrograde audit leaves Paris and moves backwards to the island. And the island is where the name was assumed. And the name is the retrograde audit's central object in this section because the name is the most significant thing. The most significant thing Edmond Dantes acquired in the course of becoming what he became. Yet the retrograde audit watches him acquire it in reverse, which is to say, watches him return it. Monte Cristo, the name of an island, the name of a treasure, the name of a man who does not exist and has never existed, and was constructed by a former sailor in a cave with a dying priest's map and an inheritance that was never intended to fund what it funded. But the retrograde audit arrives at the island before the name was taken and finds Edmond Dantes standing in a cave with treasure he has not yet decided what to do with, and the decision, moving backwards, unmakes itself. And the treasure goes back into the earth, and the name goes back to the island. And the man standing in the cave is not the Count of Monte Cristo. He is not yet anyone except what he was before the chateau, which the retrograde audit is approaching. What he was before the chateau was a sailor. The sailor is where we're going. And the cave is the last stage before we get there. And the treasure, oh, it draws the attention of the retrograde audit. It draws its full attention because the treasure is the hinge upon which the entire constructed identity turns. And the hinge running backwards is more revealing than the hinge running forwards. He was told where it was. The retrograde audit will arrive at Varia shortly, but first it attends to what the treasure produced when Edmund found it, and what the production looks like in reverse. It produced the Count, it produced the houses and the servants, and the unlimited budget, and the social campaign, and the revenge apparatus, and the name, and the 24 years of preparation compressed into a season in Paris, a season of surgical destruction. And in reverse, all of this blows back into the cave. The houses return to their cellars, the servants return to their prior lives, the budget contracts, the apparatus dismantles, the name returns to the island. The 24 years of preparation unprepare themselves. And what is left, standing in the cave on the island of Monte Cristo with the treasure back in the earth, where it was left, is a man with nothing except what he had when he arrived on the island, which was a rope, a dead priest's body, and some kind of clarity that belonged to him due to his recent escape from the place where he was never supposed to leave, a place he perhaps will go back to. The retrograde audit reaches the chateau, and this is where the methodology does its most precise work. Dantes does not escape from the chateau. The retrograde audit finds him arriving. He comes to the prison sewn into a burial sack that was supposed to contain Faria, dropped into the sea by guards who believed they were disposing of a dead man. He cuts his way out of the sack and he swims. He's found by a smuggler's vessel and he's taken aboard and he's alive and the chateau is behind him. But in the retrograde reading, he's walking toward it. The walk toward the chateau in the retrograde reading is the journey of a man returning everything he received there. He received everything, the education, the languages, the history, the science, the philosophy, the comprehensive intellectual formation that transformed a competent but untutored sailor into the mind capable of designing the Count's campaign. And of course, he received the map. He received that purpose that replaced the grief, that direction that replaced the rage, that long, patient orientation toward a future that the prison provided, because the prison was paradoxically the only place in the world where Edmund had nothing to do except become the person the future would require. In the retrograde reading, he's bringing all of this back. He returns it to Faria, and Faria dies with it returned. And the retrograde audit finds this image of the old man dying in possession of everything he gave, clarifying in the specific way that certain structural discoveries are clarifying when they reveal what a novel really understood and what the novel was really doing in a scene that's previously been described as merely moving. So he dies twice in the novel. Once when Edmund thinks he has died, and once when he actually dies. And the retrograde audit is not interested in the sequencing of these deaths. It is interested in what Faria's death means when it is the destination of the backwards reading rather than its catastrophe. And what it means is this: the old man who gave Edmund everything died having given it, and the retrograde reading gives it back to him. He dies with it, and the retrograde audit finds this a complete account of what Faria was in the novel. No device, no mentor. A man who spent everything he had on the wrong pupil at the right moment, and the retrograde reading restores the expenditure, and the chateau closes its doors. And Edmund has not yet arrived. The retrograde audit makes its final movement, and the final movement is to Marseille. Marseille is where the retrograde audit was always going, and arriving there is the argument. Edmond Dantes is on the ship. He has just completed a voyage that would have been his first command, or close to it, if the captain had not died at sea and left him the ship to bring home. He's 19 years old. He's bringing the ship into the harbour with the competence and the quiet authority of a young man who's good at his work and knows it without needing to perform the knowledge. Mercedes is waiting. His father is waiting. Morrill is waiting to discuss the captaincy. The future is a single, unbroken surface with no marks on it yet. And Edmund stands at the wheel and brings it in. And the retrograde order has been moving toward this moment through 3,000 pages of backwards plot, through the ruins of 3 men and the salvation of 2, through Paris, the island, the cave, the prison, the burial sack, the sea, and it has arrived here, the harbour, at a young man with the ship. And this is where the novel ends. The retrograde's audit's thesis is as followed. Dumas wrote a novel about getting back to the beginning, about a man who started as the Count of Monte Cristo, surrounded by wealth and apparatus and cold machinery of a revenge, and who spent 3,000 pages moving backwards through everything he had become, returning to the harbour at Marseille, to the ship, to the unbroken future, to the sailor with nothing in front of him except whatever the morning brings. The distance between the Count and Edmund is the length of the novel. The retrograde audit has covered that distance and arrived at its destination. And the destination is a 19-year-old on a ship in a harbour. And the novel, read in the correct direction, is about how he gets there. Dumas understood this and encrypted it in the novel sequence. And the sequence has been misread for 180 years. And the retrograde audit has finally corrected this misreading. The harbour is there and the ship is in. The morning is open. I'm Dr. Silas Mordaunt, Associate Professor of Literature. The retrograde audit is complete, and I do want to note for the record that I developed this methodology without institutional support, without research funding, without so much as a favourable response to the emails and even to the letters and even to the text messages I sent to the journal that shall remain nameless, and that I have nonetheless produced in this format an intervention in human scholarship that will require serious people to seriously reconsider what they thought they knew about a novel they thought they had finished with, but had, it turns out, only just begun.